Good morning guys and welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to deal with the topic of Freud, or rather I'm going to conclude a little bit. The talk about Freud already started in the other videos where I've already talked about the birth of psychoanalysis, everything that this brilliant Viennese doctor did in his career from a psychoanalytic point of view, the method that he invented, so the method of free associations, the talk of dream interpretation and the theory on psychosexual development. Today we will deal instead with the pedagogical aspect of Freud, which, despite the various criticisms he carried with him, was nevertheless of great relevance from a point of view of the pedagogy of the time. And he is considered relevant from a pedagogical point of view, precisely because he succeeded in bringing to everyone's attention the importance of the child's relationship with adults, and thus initially with his family, and later with all the adults with whom he comes across. For Freud, human life is a continuous path of self-education, in that each individual on the one hand has to fight between what are the demands of how society wants us to be and all that instinctual part that somehow stirs within us, and on the other hand, each individual instead tries to conquer a sufficient balance between the various parts of his personality, thus trying to avoid intolerable forms of discomfort. Thus, it is evident how important psychoanalytic implications are in the service of the pedagogical field. In fact, Freud shows us precisely how the first 6 years of each child's life are fundamental to the constitution of the psychic apparatus of each of us, with a view then to growing up as balanced adults. Moreover, as we have already seen when I talked about the psychosexual development of the child and thus the sequentiality of the stages and the proper passing of one stage in view of the coming new one, Freud says that the relationship with the parents becomes crucial. If the relationships are positive, surely this development will have positive outcomes. And it is so important that these stages are also overcome in a positive way because of the relationship with parents, because the relationship with parents will be the basis of what will later be the relationship with all the other people with whom children will come to relate as they grow up. Freud also had the merit of questioning what were all the traditional values of education up to that time, such as, for example, rationality, self-control, sexual repression, and basically all those things that would claim to erase what is the instinctual basis of human beings. In fact, Freud says that while it is true that the free manifestation of what are our impulses and instincts may be antisocial, it is also true that somehow, nevertheless, albeit in a controlled way, these instincts must still be satisfied. And even admitting, therefore, the importance of moral values that are the basis of a civilization, especially in sharing with others, nevertheless, Freud says that nevertheless the instinctual apparatus remains the basis of every human being. Thus, Freud saw the child very differently from the pedagogues and activists of the time, in that they saw the child as a naturally good child, while Freud portrayed the child as a subject connoted by complicated psychic and emotional processes, and consequently with an inner experience dense with drives, conflicts, and emotions. In this view, then, where the child is connoted by such a strong emotional aspect, it becomes essential in the educator's experiential and cultural background of preparation to have a strong psychoanalytic connotation. For Freud, the educator must be able to recognize the developmental patterns of each individual child and must be able to provide him or her with an education appropriate to his or her needs. To do this, he or she calls the attention of educators to what are the basic principles of psychoanalysis, thus going some way to analyze the unconscious through the interpretation of dreams, giving due importance to what are the affective conflicts of childhood in the development of the personality of all children. All these elements that constitute the psychoanalytic contribution to pedagogy have been taken up by many educators, including modern ones, precisely as a point of reference for the proper functioning of the relational context where the child comes to be. Freud was credited not only with having explored the unconscious, but also with having given a dynamic approach to psychic processes, and consequently with giving it this affective connotation that becomes fundamental in a pedagogical context. The Freudian contribution was thus taken into consideration by a great many of his followers and successors, including Klein, Bowlby, etc., and it was precisely this important marriage that came about between pedagogy and psychoanalysis that led to three fundamental aspects. The first was precisely that these Freudian psychologists opened anti-authoritarian experiential schools. The second fundamental aspect is that very great attention is given to what are the emotional affective dynamics, especially those concerning early childhood. The third, on the other hand, are real reflections that are made on what should be the gifts of educators and therefore of all those people who revolve in the first years of life around the child, parents and teachers. The thinking behind these anti-authoritarian schools is a non-repressive pedagogy. This is because, according to these scholars, it would imply the fact that the formation of neurosis and psychosis can be avoided in the child, and so there is a real initiation of libertarian schools where the child can have the freedom to express himself exactly as he wants, without any kind of censorship. And this, according to this thinking, then results in the growth of the child as a healthy and free adult. The main elements of this school are two. The first is the freedom that children must have to act and be able to express themselves freely without any kind of censorship. This will involve an introduction to personal self-government, and the frustration of urges will be limited to a few simple ground rules. The second is that the educational relationship must be based on an affective dimension, and this means in practice that all that are punishments, strict rules must be eliminated. According to these psychoanalysts, these two elements together will result in the growth of a healthy, happy adult and will precisely have excellent results on conscious and free adults. This psychoanalytic practice in early childhood is the basic premise for the growth of an adult who will be healthy from both a physical and a mental point of view. And the training of educators also becomes crucial, as they must be prepared to establish richly stimulating and fruitful relationships with each child. Let us now see what qualities a good educator must have according to these psychoanalysts. First, he or she must be able to cooperate with the other figures around the child and thus coordinate well with, for example, the parents. Then, to always create a climate conducive to learning, he has to make himself available to the group precisely as an active resource in the class group. Then, because of his psychoanalytic training in the classroom, he has to be very careful about all those situations where very strong or deep feelings come up, and so he has to know how to handle them. Based on everything I have told you, these psychoanalytically oriented pedagogues point out how education becomes precisely one of the most important fields of application of psychoanalysis itself. Well, that concludes my discussion of Freud and psychoanalysis in the service of pedagogy. If you have any questions, you can easily ask me below. I salute you, thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video.